is going to be topics, election results. We're going to look at analyze the election results a little bit. Then we're going to take a look at the legislative outlook, including what's going to happen in the next couple months under the lame duck, the first 100 days of the new Republican majority in next year, and then broadly speaking, what's going to happen in 2015. And then we'll follow up or finish up with some S-Corp priorities, and we'll go from there. We're seeing the election results. I'm sure that everybody knows what happened. It was a good day for Republicans. In House, in particular, Republicans have increased by at least 14 seats. They're up to 243. Keep in mind, 218 is a majority. There's still 14 seats that remain to be decided. So if you just split that down the middle, the expectation is that Speaker Boehner will have about 250 votes when Congress reconvenes next January. A couple things stand out from the House results. One is that the disappearance of the middle, both on the left and the right, continues. There's lots of focus on what's going on the right side of the aisle, but on the left side of the aisle, the Blue Dog Caucus, that's the moderate Democrats, continues to shrink. Back in 2008, it reached a peak of around 52 members. Starting this year, there were only 19 members, and of those, 8 of them are now gone. 2 retired, 1 ran for governor, and then 4 other ones were 5, I should say, were defeated. So the Blue Dog Caucus continues to shrink. You can see on this map, South, the Midwest is just strongly Republican. You saw some gains up in New England for conservatives or Republicans, which is unusual. Last Congress, this Congress, I should say, there were no Republicans from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, or Rhode Island. I now have 2 new members in Massachusetts, or Maine, and New Hampshire. Bad news for this Congress. It means we've got more broad representation on the Republican side of things, certainly if you're a Republican. On the other side, if you're a Republican, it means that you're doing an expanded map in 2016. Let's move on to the Senate. It's always more interesting. This cycle, nobody expected the House to flip, but the Senate was very much we're going to, the Republicans have a chance to take over the House. The results are right now, you have 52 Republicans, 45 Democrats, 3 undecided. The undecideds are up in Alaska, where Dan Sullivan is challenging Mark Begich. He right now has about a 4 percentage point win, and he's expected to hold on to that lead and certified as the senator from Alaska. In Virginia, Ed Gillespie made a strong run, but Mark Warner looks like he's going to hold on. That race, I believe, is going to go through a recount. It's under 1%, so they have a mandatory recount there. Expectation is that Mark has a big enough lead that he's going to be able to hold on in Virginia. And then down in Louisiana, Mary Landrieu won a plurality. She did not win the 50% necessary to win outright, so there's going to be a runoff on December 6th down in Louisiana. The expectation is that Cassidy is going to get the votes of other folks who are running and be able to prevail in that, but we'll see. One of the things that popped out in the election results this time around was just how far off some of the polling was. Polling was controversial back in 2012 during the presidential election, and it continues to kind of be a big question mark. For instance, one of our champions for S-Corp, Pat Roberts, on the Finance Committee, was considered to be the most endangered Republican senator. He managed to pull out a win out in Kansas. The polling had him up only, 0.8%, basically 1%, or running even, going into the election on Tuesday, and yet he managed to win by 11 percentage points. So a big difference between where the polling was at and where the actual electorate was at. You saw similar results in Arkansas, where Cotton polled at +7 going into the election, and he ended up winning by 18. Mitch McConnell in Kentucky was polling at +7. He ended up winning by 15 points. So I think what's happening here is this is not a conspiracy against Republicans so much as that pollsters are having a really hard time right now figuring out what the electorate is looking like, what the turnout's going to be. I know in 2012, turnout was a big controversy. People, including myself, did not expect for Democrats to turn out for President Obama the way they had in 2008. Turns out that they did. and Obama prevailed. This time around, I think Democrats were expecting that some of that increase in turnout that they had seen in 2012 was going to carry through and show up during the midterm here. Looks like it didn't. So my guess is that pollsters are going to have a really hard time between now and 2016 figuring out what the electorate's going to look like in 2016 and then poll accordingly. We usually don't look at governors, but we'll look at this one. Here the governor map reflects kind of similar to what we saw at the House and Senate level. That is, Republicans making solid gains. They started the evening with 28 governor houses, I guess. They now have 31. There's 10 decided. A couple of the key issues that come out of this are the implications of 2016. We'll talk a little bit about that. Just the fact that there are more Republicans out there able to host, able to act as a sounding board for some of the Republican presidential candidates. What difference does it all make? A question we get asked a lot. Does it make a difference if Republicans are running the Senate as opposed to Democrats? In this case, I think that there's certainly going to be a different focus on what the issues that they take up, but there's also going to be a process change, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated the importance of that. Our expectation is that you're going to see a return to regular order. And what that means is that, Mitch McConnell is going to be the majority leader for all intents and purposes, or by expectations. He's made it clear that he intends to restore a more traditional role for the Senate. That means a more open process on the floor, where you have lots more amendments and votes. Individual senators traditionally have had the ability to go to the floor, speak at length, offer amendments, get a vote on the issues that they care about. That hasn't been the case under Harry Reid's management of the Senate. The expectation is going to move back to that process. I think you're also going to see the committee chairman empowered. Most of the major bills over the last 6 years moving through the Senate have not gone through a regular order in terms of going to the committee, markup, report a committee, and you have the leadership of that committee managing the bill at the floor. That just hasn't been the normal process for the last 6 years. My expectation is that you're going to go back to that as well. One outstanding question is, what is Mitch McConnell going to do about the filibuster rule? Majority Leader Reid famously used what's called the nuclear option to end the ability of the minority to filibuster low-level nominees to the administration and judgeships. Expectation is that Leader McConnell will very on next year act to reverse that, but it's not necessarily a done deal. There's lots of conservatives that think it's perfectly fine to have a higher threshold, or I should say the ability, say in 2017, to move a Republican president's nominees with a simple majority. There's going to be an internal debate within the Republican Party. My guess is that at the end of the day, they reverse it. I think that McConnell is a creature of the Senate, and he's going to want to bring the rules back to where they've been for the last 30 or 40 years. On the House, you see Speaker Boehner has a significantly larger cushion with which to work. He has had a challenge over the last 4 years in terms of managing the House. He's had a small majority, and he's got a sizable group of what I refer to as the Hell No Caucus folks who just simply don't want to legislate. That's not fair. They don't want to compromise on some of these larger issues that are confronting the Congress. And what that means is that Boehner often he's ostensibly representing the majority in the House, doesn't necessarily represent the majority of the votes. His hands are tied, and he's unable to move legislation. His cushion is now about twice as big and could be almost 35 votes starting next year. That's going to give him a lot more leeway in terms of being able to move significant bills like a highway bill, like a budget resolution, maybe address immigration. We'll see. On tax policy, one of the struck me as somebody who's worked in tax policy the last 25 years is how little it played out in the elections that took place on Tuesday. Campaign ad trackers noted that very few, if any, candidates were running ads on taxes, tax cuts, tax policy as part of their reelection or election efforts. The administration and the Democrats, they tried to make inversions a national issue. They tried to make it something of a grassroots issue. I think they largely failed in that effort. Taxes did play a significant role at the state level. You had governors in Kansas, Florida, and Wisconsin who had a track record of cutting taxes. They all prevailed in difficult re-elects. On the other side, Democrats who ran states, particularly Illinois and Maryland, where they had a history of raising taxes, they end up losing despite the fact that those states are extremely blue. Exit polling did show that taxes were an issue for voters to a certain degree, but that the issue is tax fairness, tax simplicity, that sort of thing. It wasn't necessarily the actual level of taxes. The implications for the 2016 presidential elections. I'd say the big winners were Scott Walker up in Wisconsin. He survived his third successive election, poor guy. And, you know, he's apparently a glutton for punishment because it looks like he's probably going to run for president, right? Well, now he's in a position to do so as the governor of Wisconsin. Chris Christie is the head of the NJ. He spent a considerable, RGA. He spent, it should say RGA. He spent a considerable amount of time traveling the country for different governors. He now has a considerable number of allies, folks who he's campaigned for, helped get in office. They're now across the country, and they can act as a national organization and in a sounding board for his presidential aspirations. Question mark about whether Hillary Clinton was helped or hurt by the elections. On the pro side, Martin O'Malley in Maryland, his successor suffered a defeat. You could attribute that maybe to Martin O'Malley's policies, which would suggest that he's no longer as viable as he used to be. On the con side, Hillary and Bill spent a considerable amount of time traveling the country campaigning for Senate folks in particular Mr. Pryor down in Arkansas. He didn't win. A lot of the candidates didn't win. They're no longer in office. They're no longer available to be part of the broader Clinton machine. So unclear. What happens to all the senators and congressmen, or the senators and maybe one or two congressmen who are looking at a presidential run? That they're in power. There's a big question. Okay, there's going to be a considerable amount of responsibility and need for them to produce stuff in order to demonstrate that they're effective at the Senate level and help out their presidential aspirations. There's also the fact that if we're correct to see lots more legislation, lots more votes, that's a lot more opportunity for them to take difficult votes that could show up hurting them in the presidential run. We've got Ryan listed there. My expectation is that Congressman Ryan or Chairman Ryan, which case it may be, is not going to run for president, but we'll have to see. My guess is that with Scott Walker making an active run, he's going to step back and focus on, if he wins the chairmanship of the Ways and Means Committee, being the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Next thing is sort of the limited time window that Republicans have to demonstrate that can be effective, that they get stuff done. If you look at this slide, you can see that the Senate elections this year were predominantly in states where Republicans tend to do well. You can see a swath of the South, the Plain states in the middle, and then some of the northern mountain states. Those tend to be more conservative states. They tend to be more Republican. That's one of the reasons that Republicans did so well. Next, in 2016, you see more elections in the Pacific Coast there and up in the Rust Belt. That's going to be a challenge for Republicans. The expectation is that there's a high degree of chance that Republicans turn around and lose the Senate in 2017, which effectively gives McConnell and, to a lesser degree, Boehner 2 years here to demonstrate that they can be effective, create an effective track record, something compelling for voters when they return to the polls in 2 years. Look, and again, on the theme of what's different, we expect to see President Obama in a position he's going to have to veto more bills. He's only vetoed 2 bills in the last 6 years. It's historically low, and my expectation is that that's going to change. Republican Congress, they're going to be passing, particularly in the next few months or at the beginning of the year, a number of bills that are going to be wedge issues, and my expectation is that the number of vetoes that the president makes are going to go up. Investigations, chairmen get to pick which issues they investigate. To date, the Senate committees have not been active in investigating some of the hot button issues out there. With Republicans as the chair, I expect the investigations to increase considerably. And then finally, policies. You're going to see a considerable difference in the policies that are moving forward. Big changes like repealing the ACA are unlikely to move through the Congress. They're certainly less likely to get through president. My expectation is the House is going to have to, and there's already conversation about them having a vote on repealing the ACA very early next year. It'll move over to the Senate. My expectation is that McConnell will bring it up for chair, they get the 60 votes necessary to move forward. That'll be it. And then they'll start to focus on some of the issues that are sort of at the second tier or mid-cap issues. Those would include Keystone Pipeline approval. Defense spending is getting extremely low, and I know that the defense hawks on the Hill want to address that. There are trade agreements out there. Lots of second-tier issues where I expect you'll see the Republican Congress moving forward on bills, whereas the Democrat Congress did not. In terms of committee leadership, we're going to see significant changes. We talked a little bit about Ways and Means. Paul Ryan and Kevin Brady are positioning themselves to be the chair next year. I think the scuttlebutt downtown is that Paul Ryan will succeed. That's no dig on Kevin Brady. He's a terrific member, has a strong history of representation on the Ways and Means Committee. It's just that Paul Ryan's got a little bit of star quality, and so I think folks are expecting him to be the chairman next year, but it remains to be seen. Will remain as the ranking member. On Energy and Commerce, Fred Upton will remain as the chairman. He's a member from Michigan. There is a fight between Anna Eshoo and Frank Pallone to be the ranking member on ENC. Anna Eshoo is Pelosi's candidate, and Steny Hoyer is backing Frank Pallone, so it's sort of a leadership fight there as well as a committee fight. On the Finance Committee side, Orrin Hatch is expected to take over as chair. Presley could make a move, but nobody expects him to. Everybody expects him to be the Judiciary Chair and take on some of the issues that are front and center of that committee. Ron Wyden moves from chair to the ranking member. I think I've talked in the past about the relationship between Ron Wyden and Paul Ryan. Our expectation is that that relationship will produce some pretty significant policies in the next couple of years. I would be disappointed if it didn't. They both have a history of working on big issues like entitlement reform, like tax reform, and trying to move the ball on those types of things. And then on the Health Committee, Lamar Alexander is going to take over the chair, and Patty Murray will be the ranking member. In terms of who's on those committees, we did a little quick breakdown because we thought it was interesting. One of the axioms in Washington is that people are policy, and so it matters to a high degree who exactly is sitting on these committees. Here right now, there's the list of the current members of the committee, and then red are the folks who have retired or lost. In this case, I think all these folks are retiring. With the ratio, the higher number of Republicans, we expect that the committee will add maybe 1 or 2 slots. Melissa staring at me. Because Melissa's suggesting that there's also a possibility that they will try to shrink the committee because it's particularly large right now. So for Republicans, they will definitely replace the 3 members who are retiring. They may add an additional slot, which would just 4 new Republicans. On the Democratic side, I'm not sure they have to do anything. Allison Schwartz is never going to be there, and they can just keep it at the current membership. You have the list of folks down at the bottom there who are the ones we talked about and being the replacement members. On the committee, kind of a similar drill. In this case, right now, Democrats have 13 members, Republicans have 11. With the ratio, and if Republicans have 54 members, then you would expect that to kind of flip. So Republicans would be at 13, Democrats at 11. That would suggest that on the Democrat side, Mark Warner's seat or spot on the Finance Committee is endangered. On the Republican side, it looks like they'll probably get to add 2 new folks. Dan Coates, Roy Blunt, and Heller from Nevada are the ones that seem to be the ones most talked about. Legislative outlook. What is Congress going to do? They're going to return next week to wrap up the legislative session. McConnell and Boehner have both expressed a strong interest in cleaning the slate of the items that need to get done before the end of the year, getting them done with, and then moving and starting the next year with a clean slate. Cards and whether they're actually able to accomplish that are in the Senate. Majority Leader Harry Reid. He's still the majority leader. He'll control the Senate floor. Exactly what are his goals? What are his aspirations for the lame duck? Room to be seen. And then over on the House side, you have again what we refer to as the Held No Caucus. They've been making noises prior to the election that if Republicans took the Senate, they like to push off a lot of these issues until the next year. So the Republicans are running the show, and maybe they can get a better deal on some of these items. I think there's a high degree of skepticism that Republicans would be able to get a particularly better deal in January than, say, this year. It also remains to be seen that how are you going to go about funding the government? How are you going to deal with tax extenders? These items really need to get done this year. And so our expectation is that that's what's going to happen. We expect the CR omnibus to move fairly expeditiously. Our hope is that tax extenders gets done. The question on tax extenders is it done for 1 year, 20, is it done for 2 years, or is it done for a mix of 2 years, and then some of these provisions are made permanent? Other items out there include fixing doctor reimbursement under Medicare Part A. I guess that'd be Part B. That's the sustainable growth rate, reinsurance, funding for the Export-Import Bank, and then the internet tax issue that's floating around. There's a moratorium that expires in December that they need to extend or revise somehow. Okay, that's the lame duck. What's going to happen in the first 100 days? New Congresses, new majorities, they always like to come in and do something strong, and there's a long list of items that we expect the Republicans to take up when they come back. Legislation is likely to become law, includes the Keystone Pipeline approval. There's a Medicare medical device tax provision that was part of the Obamacare. The expectation is that's going to get repealed. For natural gas exports and maybe even oil exports. There's patent troll legislation that's out there that has strong bipartisan support, and giving President Obama trade promotion authority. Those are the items that we see moving expeditiously and have a good chance of not just getting through the Congress, but also getting signed into law. Legislation that may become law. We get to some of these issues that are below the level of Obamacare repeal. For instance, just going after the individual and employer mandates. The president spoke to that yesterday, said that's the line he can't draw across. But particularly with the employer mandate, they've already delayed it several times, and so it kind of creates a gray area of, okay, if it's okay to delay, why not just get rid of it? The individual one, that's probably a higher bar, but you never know how those things are going to play out. And then there's a whole host of other healthcare items out there that we expect to see to move forward next year. Hopefully, or maybe in the first 100 days, but certainly over the course of the next year. And this is sort of the broader outlook for 2015, this slide here. And the way I would characterize this is these are the catalysts. These are large vehicles that not only we expect them to pass, but also for them to pick up and carry other provisions with it, including possibility of tax provisions. The debt limit expires on March 15th. The time that they extended it, they just extended the debt limit to a date certain, which means that once we run up against March 15th, Treasury is not going to have a whole lot of wiggle room to keep the government under the debt limit, which means that Congress is going to have to move pretty quickly. In the past, the debt limit has acted as a rider for all sorts of things, including the budget or spending cuts, including the sequester that was enacted back in 2012. My question is that the Republican Congress, when they do something on the debt limit, is going to want to attach something to it. And that set up a veto opportunity. It could also set up an opportunity to address entitlements and tax policy and get something done with the White House. We'll just have to wait and see. Sustainable growth rate. This is the Medicare doctor reimbursement rate. The current path that's in place expires on March 31st. They're going to have to do something about that. Otherwise, doctor reimbursement is going to get cut by 20 or 30%. Starting in April. So that's a must-pass item. They could just kick the can down the road, or they do something more significant. Part of the challenge with the SGR is they need to find out how to pay for the change, and the change right now is in the $125 billion range. A budget resolution. We have not done a budget resolution in, we're looking at each other, 4, 5, 6 years. Congress does budget resolutions. They're passed between the House and the Senate. They do not need to be signed by the president. So this could be a Republican show where they don't need to compromise with the president. My expectation is that, returning to this theme of regular order, they're going to want and need to do something on the budget. They're going to need to pass a budget resolution just to demonstrate that it's possible that there's a new sheriff in town. The highway bill authorization expires next spring. CHIP, that's the health insurance program. Its authorization expires at the end of the fiscal year next year, starting October 1. That's going to be something that's interesting to watch because it has all sorts of healthcare and tax implications. It's kind of a no man's land now, where it used to be you had Medicaid for folks up to the poverty level, and then CHIP took care of insurance and subsidized insurance for families with children above the poverty level. But that's kind of the same area the state insurance exchanges occupy right now. So CHIP is kind of in no man's land. They're going to have to rewrite it somehow, and that might open the door to some significant health tax policies. And then, unfortunately, we're going to have to deal with extenders again. Even though we might just deal with them in the next month or so, it's only extend them through 2015. That may have to extend them for 2016, and the debate will start next year. Hopefully, they'll tear that before the end of the year, like they have in 4 or 5 years. What are our priorities? What are we going to be working on? In terms of the extenders, we have 2 provisions that are out there. The one's the built-in gains that has been discussed extensively in Congress, as well as charitable contributions of property. These were made in the Camp tax reform draft. They passed the House twice. We've been extremely appreciative of the support that we've gotten, particularly in the House of Representatives on this. Like other extenders, however, those 2 provisions, they expired at the end of 2013. So we expect them to be extended this fall. At the very least, they'll get extended for 2014. Most likely is a 2-year extension. That's 2014 and 2015. And there is going to be a strong push, particularly on the part of the representatives and Mr. Camp, to make some of these provisions permanent, including those 2. He wants to move as much of his tax reform plan as possible, make it permanent. To have these provisions permanent, it's certainly not helpful to have them expire every 12 months or 18 months. On the other hand, it would also help with the baseline in terms of you make these provisions permanent. You don't have to go in your tax policies. You don't have to account for the cost of that. It's continuing to be talked about, including there's a number of stories on it today. And the question is, can tax reform move forward early next year? That is the result of this ongoing challenge with corporate inversions. Corporate inversions on the Democrat side, there's a number of bills out there to address them. Treasury put forward regulations to address them directly in the sense of let's either rules that help companies, let's reduce some of the benefits that companies get. We invert, let's walls around the U.S. so that it's less easy for companies to invert. Some Democrats, mostly Republicans, have argued that no, the correct way to address inversions is to reform the tax code and make the U.S. a more attractive place for corporations to incorporate and remain and to keep their headquarters and operations. The challenge with that, obviously, is that tax reform is very difficult and doesn't look like it's going to move forward. So in that void, we've seen an increase amount of discussion on the idea of corporate-only tax reform. Pretty over at the Treasury Department, there's been a number of high-level speeches. They've been working, talking to folks up on the Hill. They've been talking to the folks in the corporate community. They have not been talking to us, although I think we are going to go in and talk to them and let them know about the importance of the pass-through community and why they need to be part of it. The challenge to corporate-only reform is very simple. One, there's very little agreement on exactly what that reform is going to look like. Lots of talk about unanimity. Yes, corporate's easy, but once you get past the idea that we're going to cut the rate down to 28 or 25%, that unanimity kind of disappears. There's no agreement on whether the reform would raise money or whether it should be revenue neutral. The Obama administration has made it clear that if they do reform, they're going to want to raise some revenue so that they can spend that money on something else. Mr. Boehner, Mr. Hatch over on the Senate side have made clear that if they do tax reform, at least it's going to be budget neutral. And then I mentioned pass-through businesses. That's a 100-pound gorilla right now. Nobody knows what to do with the pass-throughs. We've set up our priorities here, and we've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years. They're listed there. To the extent that we are going to do tax reform, it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to adopt rate parity. That is, if you're an individual, you're a small business, you're a corporation, the top rate should be the same, or at least in the same ballpark. And then we need to continue to reduce or double tax on corporations. That's an accident of history, and that's the thing that makes our businesses less competitive when they're competing out there in the global economy. Items that we've been working on right now, our sort of legislative effort year in and year out is the S-Corp modernization bill. We're working with our leadership right now in preparation for next year, looking at some new provisions, trying to make sure that the bill's introduced as early as possible. Our leadership on this bill is intact. Mr. Hatch intends to continue to be the lead over in the Senate. Mr. Cardin's been terrific. He's the Democrat from Maryland. And then we have Mr. Reichert and Kind over on the House side, two Ways and Means members with lots of seniority are our champions over there. We're also focused on the 3.8% Affordable Care Act tax. This is something that came about as part of Obamacare. It took effect at the beginning of 2013, the same time that the fiscal cliff effect. And when you combine the effects of those, the fiscal cliff and the new 3.8% tax, the net result is pass-through businesses, S-Corps, they're facing the top rate of almost 45%. Compared to the corporation down the street that's only facing a top rate of 35%. That's not sustainable over a long period of time, and we're going to have to do something about it. The aspiration payroll tax issue continues to raise its head. Unfortunately, it always raises its head as sort of, well, here's $10 billion that we can, use to spend on this, that, and the other thing. We would to see a more thoughtful approach to somehow figuring out how to appropriately tax S corporations so that you're not raising taxes on capital and investment, and you are appropriately imposing payroll taxes on wages and salary. And the last thing that we work on is the ISIS provision, which is a big benefit to businesses, particularly pass-through businesses, but also corporations that are housed in the United States that produce here and they export overseas. And we've had a long history of defending that. The last thing I'd add on the additional items is into tax reform. We're also hearing lots of noise about the idea of doing comprehensive business tax reform, which would be to look at pass-throughs and corporations and do something that's sort of unified and addresses both those sides of the tax code. That's something that we've seen other people write about. We're hearing about it downtown as well. So that's something to keep an eye out for. The key takeaways. From the elections have given Republicans a 2-year window to demonstrate that Congress is not broken. See a dramatic increase in legislative activity in coming months. More bills, more amendments, more votes. Just as an aside, I tell you, you have a high number of members up on the Hill, and particularly in the Senate, lots of staff up there who have never worked in the Senate when it's operating under regular order. And I think they're going to get a baptism of fire in the next few months, because what they're going to realize is, wow, having lots of votes, having an open process on the floor is terrific. You get stuff done, but it's also a lot more work than it's been over the last 6 years. Increased activity means increased chances for tax policy to move. Tax reform we consider to be unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. But smaller tax bills and smaller tax policies could ride on larger vehicles like the debt limit, like the highway bill, et cetera. We expect that's possible and frankly likely. As always, we're going to continue to fight to make sure that the interests of S corporations specifically and pass-through businesses more generally are represented. We've been neck deep in the whole tax reform fight for the last 3 or 4 years. We're continuing to make sure that Congress doesn't go around raising taxes on, as some of our members like to, using our membership as their own personal ATM machine. That's our goal. Improve the rules for S corporations and make sure that Congress doesn't do anything that harms their ability to go out and create jobs and invest. So with that, I'm going to stop. Alex is in here, and he's pointing at something. This. Okay. All right, unmuting you all, which means that you are now unmuted. If anybody has a question, I'd like to hear it. This is your chance. Dan, anything out there? Ron Travis is on the phone. We got Tom Nichols. We got some folks here. No? Is there any questions? I'm going to give you 10 more seconds, and then we're going to sign off. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We're going to try to do this on a more regular basis. We apologize for the technical challenges we had this morning, but we appreciate coming back and listening in. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody.